You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. This is a special episode for me because it was recorded live in person in St. Louis, Missouri on a recent trip to my hometown. The guest on this episode is Adam Russell, bassist for Story of the Year, one of the most well-known bands to ever come out of the city. Adam co-hosts Thank the Maker, a podcast about heroes, princesses, scoundrels, hokey religions, ancient weapons, and all things Star Wars, and he also co-hosts Page Avenue Crew with his bandmates in Story of the Year. This conversation for this podcast with Adam was a year and a half in the making, and we squeezed this in just before the band left for their first tour in quite some time. And in this episode, Adam and I discuss our journeys through music, St. Louis, our love of propaganda, and then we examine his love of the songs Back to the Motor League, Tertium Non Datur, Without Love, and Comply, Resist. These stories that Adam tells are personal, powerful, and yet again affirm to me the power of what propaganda has done for their listeners all over the world. I hope you enjoy this conversation a fraction as much as I enjoyed having it, and this really made my trip home to St. Louis quite special. So thank you so much to Adam for the hospitality and the great chat. If you want to follow Adam's work, you can find him online at Adam the Skull on Twitter and Instagram. As a dude who was born and raised in St. Louis, this conversation was a total thrill for me. So please enjoy my conversation with Adam Russell.
Want some Star Wars clips here? Okay.
That's fabulous. Adam Russell, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Great to be here. Great for you to be here in my home.
I'm with you, and this is so crazy. You live a mile from my parents, so this was like the most convenient thing ever, and I'm delighted by the invitation. It's wonderful to hang in person. There's like a vibe that you get from in-person podcasts that you can't replicate when you're doing it over the internet because like you're constantly trying to like not crosstalk when you're recording online. But here it's like so much more authentic because like you do some podcasting. Like have you found stuff like that as well in your work?
For sure. The tricky part is it doesn't matter how well you know someone, how long you've been friends. If you haven't developed the skill of speaking via video chat, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So my band podcast that we started during the pandemic, we did a few episodes down here in my basement, and then it really started to ramp up, so we started to do it remotely, and everyone else in my band sucked at it so badly. They hated the vibe. We would talk over each other, and it was that thing where I knew to just stop if I started talking over someone, not point it out, just let it flow. But other dudes would be, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right.
It's like, no, dude, just keep rolling. But with the Star Wars podcast, my other podcast, we've been doing that remotely since day one. We live in 3 different cities, and we've just developed the skill. And it's also a much less conversational, more structured podcast, so we can sort of take turns and know when to interject, when not to, and it works. So regardless, point taken, in person, much better vibe. We didn't evolve as a species on the internet. We evolved out in the damn weeds in Africa. So we should be face to face.
You know, I'm wondering about your podcast projects as well. You got Page Avenue Crew. Mm-hmm. You guys are 100 episodes in?
Damn near, yeah.
I mean, what do you get out of these projects and you got your Star Wars podcast. What's the name of that one again?
Thank the Maker.
So tell me like what you get out of this medium as just a person who likes to create stuff.
I mean, you kind of said it right there. I've always been a person who likes to create things, and I like to have conversations about things. I've always been a thinker, sometimes to a fault. I just think so much that it's debilitating, you know. But I like going down the rabbit hole on different subjects, and Star Wars and music being the 2 biggest things in my life. I mean, Star Wars is like my religion. Yeah. It provides that community, that sense of like, theological exploration almost, you know?
So many Taoist overtones within the Force and like the Tao.
Yeah.
There's a lot there that, I mean, scholars of religion have been poking at for decades now.
Yeah, and it's all built on the archetypes that have been laid for thousands of years through other mythologies. I mean, it truly is a modern mythology. So I, being a person who has always been into religion and mythology before, when I was a believer, and then in transition and then after, it really appeals to me on that level. And I'm just so emotionally attached to it as well. I got to a point in, I want to say it was 2015, 16-ish, where I really wanted to do a new creative project. This is after I had left Story of the Year, which lasted, I want to say 5 years. I left the band. I was approaching a midlife crisis, wanting to do something creative. I was working for Apple at the time. Great job. As far as corporate jobs go, it was great. But it was retail. It was, it was what it was. And I just had this itch. I had to do something creative. And talking about Star Wars, especially with the sequels coming out, was getting more and more compelling. And it just made sense. Like, this is a thing I know I can do. I can do well. I have a background in editing, mostly with video, but I've edited a lot of audio as well. Made a documentary, so that's essentially audio editing with talking heads.
Yeah.
So I said, let's do this. And it became this labor of love, kind of passion project, that it went from a hobby to kind of my full-time job, even though I wasn't really making money from it.
Right.
To Patreon and everything working. And then we started it with Story of the Year as well. And I realized, oh, wow, this is kind of my wheelhouse. This works really well. And I love communicating. I love hanging with people. I love sharing ideas. So now I'm kind of a full-time podcaster and part-time musician.
Yeah.
Until we go on tour, then that ratio is going to flip. But that's my life right now.
I love it. Well, and so for me, like, our Propaganda podcast is hundreds of hours long at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, we're over 100 episodes if you include all the bonus episodes. We've done like 85 songs, deep dive episodes on these particular songs. And it's just been an all-consuming obsession for me for so long. And people are like, some people have been like, you have an unhealthy obsession with the band. And I was like, no, I have an unhealthy obsession with the process.
And the ideas.
Yeah, there's so much that I've gained from doing this project. And I thought this podcast was going to be easy. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I thought it was going to be like me and my friend talking about songs. And then before you know it, these episodes are like turning into like 3-hour marathons, 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then we hit 5 hours. And I was like, this is absolutely insane. But, we're from like the same place. Like, we're here in our hometown in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And I don't really get to come here that often. So, noticing on February 13th, 2021, when you tweeted, listen to Propaganda. And on February 14th, 2021, I replied, come on the podcast. We would love to have a St. Louis Propaganda superfan on the show. And literally a year and a half later, here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are. So, I'm wondering if, like, you already mentioned Story of the Year a little bit. And the Story of the Year was on Epitaph for a long time. Label mates with Propaganda in a way, that. So that's pretty cool. But tell the audience a little bit about your journey through music here in St. Louis, because I feel like since you and I are both from here, the context in this city matters.
Yeah, for sure. St. Louis is an interesting town to try to succeed in music, because we don't have much of a scene, and the scene we do have, it's a lot of bad vibes. The scarcity creates competition and jealousy and all this kind of shit. It was rough coming up, but it being that kind of scenario also lends itself to kind of just pulling all of the folks together who are most driven, not necessarily the most talented, but the most driven to make shit happen. And that's what Story of the Year was. I was in a shitty nu metal band with all my friends from high school. I mean, no shade on you guys. I love you. We all know we were shitty.
Yeah. I was in a shitty high school band too. It's like just the way you just have to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I was a rapper. It was bad.
Oh man, amazing.
And we played shows with Big Blue Monkey that was the predecessor to Story of the Year. The guitar player, Ryan, was in my band for a minute as well. And we kind of we saw each other as people who were doing stuff. They were obviously much more talented, but we were as driven. So when that band broke up and then the bass player left Big Blue Monkey, they asked me, because even though I wasn't a bass player, I played guitar. But I didn't own a bass, didn't own a bass amp. They're like, Anna could play bass. He kicks ass. He'll work hard. He's fun.
Yeah.
And that's how I joined. And it was really in that era where it was about having fun and just being kind of unhinged.
Right.
You know, like we came up in the nu metal days, and then emo and punk rock in the late 90s, and then the 2000s hit, and bands like Glassjaw and At the Drive-In were happening, and they were just like over the top, losing their shit kind of live bands, and we said we want to be that mixed with all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So we started doing that in St. Louis, and I mean, I don't want to sound like arrogant, but we were just fucking destroying everyone.
Yeah.
Like, the levels that we were going to, the stuff that we were doing on stage was, I mean, we weren't always sounding the best, but we were trying to put on the best show that anyone had ever seen.
Yeah.
So that's ultimately what got us signed. That combined with kind of the Blink-182 Jackass era of just like pushing each other in shopping carts, like into the bushes down the hill, setting each other on fire kind of shit. That's what got us signed.
Yeah.
We happened to write some pretty cool songs, and somehow Until the Day I Die came out of that time period, and we developed this kind of like new mainstream version of emo, screamo, hardcore punk thing that was, we were kind of all approaching the same thing. The Used, you know, Taking Back Sunday, we were all approaching the same thing. And it broke, it went mainstream, and here we are 20 years later, you know, one of the few bands that made it out of St. Louis and have been successful internationally, and I couldn't feel luckier or more just like privileged that we did that in a city like St. Louis. You know, we're not from Southern California, we're not from New York, so I feel lucky. There's a damn platinum plaque right there on my wall, dude.
I'm looking at it. It's amazing. I saw that right when I walked into this room, and I was like, platinum record right there on the wall.
It blows my mind every day.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting is my connection to your band is that I was working when Page Avenue came out in 2003. I was working at Streetside Records on Watson Road.
Sick.
In Crestwood. And your band did a thing where if you pre-ordered the record, you got a ticket to the CD release show at the pageant. So we had people out the door every day pre-ordering this album and coming in and picking it up and then getting the free ticket to the show. And we all went because we were like, this is freaking sweet. Yeah. So we all went to the show too. And so I was at that show where you guys had the CD release party at the pageant in St. Louis. So like 19 years ago, that was like me connecting with like your band, like watching this band from St. Louis do something that not a lot of other bands from St. Louis have done.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, you know, this is just kind of like setting the stage. I love hearing these kinds of stories because whenever I started this podcast, like I started being able to connect with these people who do all this really cool stuff. And I was like, I can't believe I get to have conversations like this with people because, you know, thinking back on like the fact that I've like interviewed Chris Hanna a couple times now and everybody from Propaganda, like if you would have told me the me of 1999 that, I would have been like, oh, whatever, you're absolutely insane.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how the world has developed. How did you get into Propaganda? Like, how did you find this band that, like, you know, I realized that you loved very, very much as well. Tell me about your origin story with Propaganda.
It's interesting because the music that I discovered in, I don't know, middle school, like kind of preteen, early teen years, was very much like 90s suburban white dude music. Mm-hmm. It was like Vanilla Ice, which led and MC Hammer, which led to kind of some rap rock stuff, but also Guns N' Roses, Metallica, stuff like that. So I became like this metalhead and then new metalhead, like, you know, spiky yellow hair and Arnett glasses, big pants, like just typical 90s kid.
Oh, dude, but like St. Louis has a particular strand of that as well. Like this, being from this place, like that is so, there's a lot of specificness that goes into that.
Yeah. So it's funny that I somehow, I mean, this is thanks to like having friends all over the whole city, because I went to a private school, but that included kids. I mean, it wasn't a diverse school, obviously, but it was kids from all over the city. So that exposed me to different friend groups, which led me to, and that and playing shows led me to meeting the Big Blue Monkey dudes who became Story of the Year. And they were very into nu metal as well. But Dan, the drummer at the time, who became our singer, was like to the core punk rock kid.
Punk rock, Fuck Off and Dies.
Yeah.
Amazing band.
Yeah. So it was really through Dan and kind of his smaller group that I discovered punk. And I didn't understand it yet, but I was exposed to it constantly. Mm-hmm. So it was stuff like NoFX, Suicide Machines, Propagandhi, and I say Propagandhi, by the way. I can't make myself say Propagandhi. I just can't do it.
There's no, we've been over this.
I try so hard.
I know, we've been over on the podcast so many times. It's like this recurring, that's like the recurring joke in the podcast. The other recurring joke is that we actually do script a lot of the things that we say in the show. Like it has an unfortunate title, Unscripted Moments. And Keith and I talk about that all the time. We're like, yeah, we really botched that title. So anyway, so it's totally fine.
It's irony. So like I said, I was exposed to it, but I didn't quite understand it because I was into that like very sludgy, just like knuckle dragging, Gorilla Juice head new metal shit. But there was something about it. It really started with Today's Empires, where something connected with my stupid, kind of angry for no reason and angry at nothing specific, kind of like Woodstock '99 brain.
Yeah.
I remember hearing the first song. I want to say Ryan, our guitar player, who's not so much a punk rock kid, played it for me in his Eagle Talon.
Nice.
Played Mateka, the intro, and just the way that tension builds, with the quote, you're like, when's the music going to start? And then when it hits, it's like I have goosebumps.
Dude, me too. You're giving me goosebumps right now.
It's undeniable. Like you hear some bands and you question how much they mean it or what their intent is. Are they trying to write a pop song? Are they just trying to write something to make people have a mosh pit? Anywhere in between. But there's no questioning the sincerity of that band on every level, every layer of the onion. Like Chris's voice, all I could think was, this dude fucking means every word he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what he means or what he's saying yet, but I'm intrigued and I'm on board.
Mm-hmm.
So that album just, of course, it was on everywhere because it was one of those albums. It was a complete sea change, a shift in the genre, in the band. They became the Propagandhi that I know and love.
Did you?
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Did you happen to have a ticket for their post 9/11 booked date at the old Creepy Crawl?
Believe it or not, I've never seen them live.
Okay. Yeah. You simply must. It's going to happen for you. I'm putting that vibe across this room right now for you, that this is going to happen for you in the future, because it is like but here's the thing about that show at the Creepy Crawl in 2001 is it didn't happen because they beelined for the border from Kansas City. Yeah. So the St. Louis show post 9/11 did not happen. So the Today's Empires lineup did not hit St. Louis because they were trying to get out of the country. Yeah. So, I mean, that's so crazy. I mean, because you probably went to tons of shows at that old Creepy Crawl, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, we shot our first video there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Holy smokes. That North Tucker location before they moved over, and that other one over by Slough that only lasted a couple years.
Yes.
Because they moved.
Yeah. I don't think we were out and touring by the time it moved, so I don't think I ever actually saw a show there. But
because I saw Propagandhi, the first time I ever saw them live was here in St. Louis at second Creepy Crawl with Beeve in 2007 on the Potemkin years after Beeve had joined the band. So that was my first time. I mean, I didn't see him for a long time, so it's really cool. But we're gonna talk about some songs here. I love doing this thing where I've kind of rethought the structure of the podcast a little bit here, because my partner in crime, Keith, is on hiatus a little bit. He's moving across the country, starting a new job. He's kind of in flux at the moment. So I have just been having these conversations where I find fantastic guests and talk about songs of their choosing, but not limited to one, like I've did the first couple of years of the show.
Right.
And so, we're going to start with a Today's Empires song. Is there anything else you want to say about Today's Empires as an LP, as a whole product that really stands out to you before we dial in on Back to the Motor League?
I mean, I think a lot of what I said about discovering it kind of encapsulates my feelings about it.
It's like your moment.
Yeah. And there was, without knowing their thoughts on their band and who they were, I feel like I understand it. I've, read and listened to a few interviews over the years, but I understand that they were kind of this more technical, more articulate version of NoFX for a while. That's who they wanted to be. And then they grew up. And it seems like, looking back in history, it happened overnight. They just went away and came back and said, motherfuckers, we're this now.
Yeah.
And everybody better listen.
I think that that's exactly how some people at the record label felt too. Like I interviewed Jason Hall, who sings for Western Addiction, a band on Fat right now, but he worked at Fat Records in 2001 when that record came out, and they started getting the record itself. And the first time they put on Back to the Motor League in the office as a staff, he said that like he was looking around and no one could believe what they were hearing.
Yeah.
And there's a really famous tweet from Brendan Kelly from the Lawrence Arms where he tweeted, he's like, there are two kinds of songwriters, those who have written Back to the Motor League and those who haven't.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Back to the Motor League.
I like to party fucking hard. I like my rock and roll the same. Don't give a fuck if I burn out. Don't give a fuck if I fade away. Back to the Motor League with me. Before I force to face the wrath of a well-who-buying public who live vicariously through. Tortured out his car and truck for punching macho pablum. Back to the Motor League I go. Once thought I drew a lucky hand, turned out to be a live grenade. Oh my god. Holy shit! Play acting anarchists and mommy's little skinheads. Death with the single fence and wieners stuck on straight edge. Fuck off!
Tell me a little bit about your personal connection with this particular song.
Man, it is, it's funny because, like a lot of things with Propaganda, on the surface, on a superficial level, you just connect to the energy.
It rocks.
It fucking rocks. You hear somebody say, I like to party fucking hard, and you go, yeah, me too, and you're doing it right now, and let's. But then you go deeper, you start to peel back the layers of the onion, you really dig into the lyrics, and you see there's so much more, and in this case, it spoke directly to what I was doing, what my band was doing, the scene we were in a way that some would be really butthurt by, really offended by, but instead, I remember Dan and I, the singer, we were working on lyrics for our second album, and we were, of course, referencing Propaganda and all of our favorite bands. H2O was another big one in terms of vibes.
In the Wake of Determination?
Yeah.
You have Propaganda references on that record?
Inspiration in terms of like trying to think a little bit harder and go a little deeper.
Understood. Perfect.
And kind of trying to stray away from the just straight emo, my hands are at your throat kind of fucking stuff. We obviously didn't achieve our goal all that successfully, but we tried. And I remember sitting on the couch in my old house in the basement with Dan, and we're reading these lyrics, the outro, and we read it. Dan read it out loud, and he just went, well, that's us, and we fucking suck. You know what I mean? And it was actually motivating because it was something that made us try harder, made us think harder about the art that we were making, the message that we were putting out into the world. And we stumbled through that for years, sometimes successfully, sometimes we completely failed. But it was that song specifically that made me just kind of question everything, which is always good in any part of life. The more you can question yourself and try to learn from it, the better.
I'm thinking about some of the stories that you were telling earlier. We have a lot of references in here. We have, Korn, Eminem, Limp Bizkit, people who say that they're anarchists. We have the straight edge reference. We've got so many references here.
And I connect to every single one of them.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Tell me about how the references are kind of like, because it seems like you and Dan were figuring out that maybe this was like sort of almost like calling you out.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. Like, how does it feel to get like to process what is happening here and be like, whoa, there's a lot of aspects of my identity here.
Yeah. So as a much younger person, well, much younger, I was 23 or 4 at the time. As a much younger person than that, as a teenager, if I would hear something that conflicted with my narrow, raised in a conservative household view, I would just kind of ignore it. I could live in that cognitive dissonance that every current right-wing rage fan lives in, you know?
Yeah.
But as a...
Paul Ryan's favorite band.
Right.
What in the God's name?
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that was what I did as a teenager. But as a 23, 24-year-old person, I instead just like took this at face value and said, okay, well, that's me. That was me. Maybe I haven't been on the right place or on the right track the whole time. Maybe I should think about my own shit. And it just opened doors for me. So it made me think about, like, it didn't destroy my appreciation for Eminem and Korn and Limp Bizkit, but it made me, it helped me parse and kind of separate the love for the music from the identity and like a lot of the toxic elements of that. So, you know, and some of that was still very much a part of like my persona on stage, how I would speak to the crowd, how I would just scream at the fucking crowd, and trying to balance, you know, screaming in a way that motivates and gets people amped up, and screaming in a way that's just like toxic Woodstock 99. I keep referencing this because of the documentary.
I watched it too.
Dude, oh my God.
I know.
It hit home so hard, I was depressed for a full week. I couldn't think about anything else, but man, am I still any of that at all? How do I fix that?
I tell you what, like whenever like the whole Brett Kavanaugh hearings were coming out for SCOTUS a couple of years ago, I was like sitting there thinking about all the times in my life where I had drank beer with my friends, and there were like people at a party, and like I was like racking my memory being like, have I behaved in the way that this human being who is now defending himself to the death, admitting zero error in any way, not reflecting in any way that it's possible that he may have acted in a monstrous situation at one point in his life decades ago. Like the 0% willingness to admit that maybe you have done something horrible in the past, and just like,
or even questionable.
Yeah. I know. And so like that's the thing, is like that really stands out to me about kind of what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
Like thinking about all these things in the past, like, am I still this? Have I done enough work on myself to move myself out of these other toxic traits?
Right. And then a lot of stuff about, being straight edge for several years as well, that connected with me. Being very much in the scene, playing Vans Warped Tour. I mean, he might as well have said dedicated to Vans Warped Tour at the end of this.
Yeah.
It had me question it, but not in a way that just said, well, no, I'm done with everything. It was more like, well, how can I use this platform, this position, this power that we have as a known artist that people listen to and care about, to kind of shift or maybe open people's minds a little bit, shift the narrative of what we are as a band and what the scene means. Mm-hmm. And that led us to The Black Swan, our third album, which was very political and socially aware through the whole thing. There were better songs in the album before, so I think it was maybe more successful in that regard. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, it was still a step on a journey to be better at communicating ideas and saying things that resonate with people in a way that isn't divisive.
There's a line in here that I'm wondering, drunken brawls.
Yeah.
Were you guys brawlers at all?
Well, we got jumped by Godsmack's road crew once.
Jeez Louise.
That was a hoot. It was the most punk rock moment of our life. And then we got jumped by these fucking Gorilla Juice heads. I don't want to tell the story on here because we promised the patrons of Page Avenue Crew that we would tell that as an exclusive.
Amazing.
But and then we got in one bar fight for good reason, because these hillbilly douchebags in Texas were calling our friends and tour mates letter kills. They were dropping the F word. Not the fuck one, the other one, on them all over the place in this bar, and we got into one there.
Yeah, what's really funny, I have another story about your band. I used to be a door guy at the Blue Note in Columbia.
Wow. Nice.
So I worked at the Blue Note in Columbia, Missouri for 4 years. Story of the Year came through 2 or 3 times from my memory. And I don't remember what your tour manager's name was during those years. I can't remember. I can remember exactly what he looks like.
It was probably Chad.
He helped us drag some horrible people who were like jumping behind the bar and like stealing alcohol and like sexually like grabbing women in the crowd and things like that. So we were hauling these groups of people out, and your tour manager was like helping us drag these people out of the club as well. And it was amazing. I remember
Nice.
like it was yesterday. I don't know if he remembers it, but like I remember it because I was like 21 and we're like dragging these people out of the club at a Story of the Year show at the Blue Note in Columbia.
Sick.
It was amazing.
Yo, were you there? Just a side note. Were you there the time that we, I think it was the Blue Note, brought out a 10 by 10 like merch tent on stage and just set it up?
Yeah.
Ruined our drummer's entire show. But we just thought it was the funniest thing that we'd ever done.
Yeah.
Because in those days, we played 1,000 shows by then. All we could think of was what's something bizarre and weird that we could do to entertain ourselves and make people never forget what happened.
Yeah, and to make it memorable for you as well, because then all the shows don't blend together as much, and you can have like a standalone memory, because having something unique happen in a very repetitive activity is something that helps human beings create a new memory,
For sure.
which makes life feel longer. You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
I love that. So I love that you love Back to the Motor League for creating a self-reflective atmosphere for you, because I almost feel like maybe this song was like a turning point in a lot of major decisions for you as a person. Like, am I hearing that right?
Yeah, it wasn't a singular moment, but it's the kind of thing where every time I went back to it, I would reflect again and think, man, who am I as a musician? Who are we as a band? Who am I as a person? Mm-hmm. And it continues to resonate today because there's so many fucking words in the song.
Fair weather politics is a massively important one because we're watching a spiral within the country that you and I are forced to live in, essentially. And, this fair weather politics thing is like really stark to me right now.
Yeah.
Because it feels like actually horrible long-term things are happening instead of, it just being a theoretical thing.
Right. Yeah. It's no longer. It's not a speculative fiction.
Right.
It's all happening right in front of our eyes. And I mentioned before we started recording, Roe versus Wade being overturned. I couldn't function for a month, and I'm a white male.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. So I can only imagine what it's. I mean, I had conversation after conversation with my wife about how I felt guilty for being so depressed. It's like that level of fuckery going on in this world. And I was disgusted scrolling through social media how immediately people just went back to business as usual. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do it. Like, I watched our podcast numbers plummet, social media numbers and all this shit, because I just couldn't post anything normal. I couldn't participate in the world as if this tragic event hadn't just happened.
Yeah.
So the fair weather politics thing, that exact lyric has resonated with me significantly in the past couple months. Mm-hmm. Just continues.
And as the father of a young girl myself,
man,
I'm just like absolutely blown away at how many things have been taken for granted across my entire life. Things that you thought were set in stone, and then just to watch them just poof, literally in a single instant, just gone, poof,
overnight,
disappear.
Yeah. Well, luckily you're close to the border.
I am. I'm very close. Okay, so let's change songs.
Let's do it.
Let's move forward in time a little bit. 2009, Supporting Cast. We've got a couple songs from this record. I want to start with Tertium Non Datur.
All the sock thumbs and hell skirts and blankets so secure they black out the sleep of the floodlights that could free them from the darkness that surrounds them, the demons that keep haunting them and gouge their eyes till all they can see. All rigid dichotomies of the sacred and the profane, salvation or shame, with fuck all in between.
But I want to hear your thoughts on supporting cast as a whole. Tell me about this piece of work to you as like a whole product.
It's one of those albums that is, today's Empires to me is foundational, and that will kind of always be my favorite because of the moment in time when I discovered the band and so on. But supporting cast is kind of, I would say, if I can look at my own fandom objectively, is probably my favorite album. Because it was another kind of level up, and it was one of those albums that I immediately recognized as amazing, but it took me a while to absorb it all and appreciate it as much. And that's been a thing with every one of their albums. It takes time because there's so much to ingest. And I think I probably revisit it more than any, once I get over the kind of recency bias of a newer album.
Sure.
But it was, again, the energy and the sincerity of and the intensity of the vocals and the music that really got me. And then you start peeling back the layers of the onion, and I start to, as a musician, connect to the musicianship in this particular song. And
yes.
That's the most compelling thing. Like I keep having conversations with people and pointing out what I'll talk about here in this song. And it's, this band is just like, their music is just the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes.
It's like a Tarantino film or something. There's like a quote that'll resonate with you 15 years later. That's like, man, that line, it's that experience for me musically.
And this is really interesting. I think we should talk about the music too. I have talked to, we did this episode very early on. I had Sue Lynn from Propaganda on, and we chatted about how Sue Lynn appreciated this song's musicianship. And this song has a longer history than that, of course.
Yeah, which I recently learned on.
Yeah, David Gillis, the Beeve, who was in Propaganda for several years, his older band, Giant Sons from Winnipeg, with Robbie Richardson and David Tkach, who still play music in other bands as well, they were an instrumental band called Giant Sons, and they put together this song it was originally called Repairing the Damaged Beard, and Beeve brought it to Propaganda, and they turned it into this like more fully realized idea.
Yeah.
And as a professional musician yourself, somebody who's like spent your life playing music in front of crowds, making records, tell me like a little bit more about the music of this one and why and what it does to your musician brain while you're listening to it.
I'll first say, comparing the original with the Propaganda version.
Yeah.
It's almost like watching a student film and then the full, 20th Century Fox version of a film.
Yeah.
How it's so leveled up. It's, it's the same length basically, but adding the vocals is almost like the difference between a short and a feature length, right?
Yeah.
And how everything's just sharper and crisper around the edges and more technical and more refined. It's beautiful. But the thing that really gets me with this song is it's technically all in 6/8 time signature, but it has that double time feel that gives it an energy and a momentum that you don't typically get out of 6/8. Out of that, like for anyone who's not a musician, 6/8 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. It's that Popeye the Sailor Man kind of like swingy, holding a stein of beer kind of vibe, right? For us, that's, on Page Avenue, that's Anthem of Our Dying Day. It's got this swinging kind of like really fun to sing and kind of easy on the ears, but I don't know, very beautiful melodic kind of feel. But when you add that double time thing, it doesn't feel like 6/8 for a minute unless it's accented in that way, or unless you already detect that as a listener or a musical listener. And it's doing things with the beat that I have tried to incorporate for years, when we're all sitting in the room and I'm just like, yeah, let's try that thing that I want to do again, but it never works out. We've done a few things here and there with it, and there's a beat on a 6/8 song on the new album that gets a little bit into that. But every time someone, I love 6/8 period. And anytime someone does something creative with it, like there's a No Doubt B-side that does the same thing.
Oh, cool.
It just sounds like double time to start until the rest of the instruments start to come in, because it starts on drums. And it's so interesting to me. I know for like high-level musicians, it's just like, yeah, it's just whatever, it's what you do. But being in kind of a punk hardcore kind of emo band, it's a little outside of the box. So that with the intricacy of the way these dudes play their instruments and the intensity of the vocals is just, it's like fucking magic to me. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. So
yeah, and I get the impression this is an extremely hard song to play as well. The band hasn't been playing it lately, but when I saw Propagandy, I interviewed Chris for the student newspaper when I was in grad school at my university in Canada. And after I interviewed him, it was the goofiest interview ever. I brought my white plastic Apple computer laptop, and I hit record on GarageBand, and I stood and I held my computer like this next to Chris, and I recorded our interview into GarageBand while literally holding a full-size laptop up to his face. It was amazing. But I mean, then I watched their sound check because nobody kicked me out. And he went right to the stage for sound check, and they played Tertium Non Datur like 5 times in a row.
Whoa.
Because I get the impression that this is a song that requires constant, precise practice in order to keep that dialed in. Do you know how that feels with your band? Like where there's like a song that you can like pull off, but like in order to pull it off in front of a crowd, you have to keep playing it all the time.
Yeah, and it's not just the complexity of the parts or the kind of like dexterity that you need to play a lot of the stuff. The transitions and the fills are also all pretty non-standard. And doing that double time 6/8 thing and transitioning to the sort of, I don't know, it's not the chorus, that kind of bridgy interlude part that goes between the verses, right? It's not a refrain, truly, right?
Yeah.
But it settles down into actual 6/8, but the fill that goes into it is so non-standard that it's jarring. If you're not fully settled into that beat, it's a fucking train wreck, I assume, you know?
Yeah. This song's got a lot going on lyrically as well.
Yes.
And, you know, we've got a lot of discussions of the sacred. You've alluded to religion in your own life a couple of times now. And, you know, I'm wondering where your mind goes when you examine what is being discussed here within this song.
Well, the title, I mean, the title says a lot, and until you go look up the translation of the title, you obviously don't know that. So the title translates to the law of excluded middle. Mm-hmm. Basically meaning there are extremes. If there's a right and a wrong, there's nothing in between. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you kind of get that from the lyrics. But what he's actually saying is the translation would be the fallacy of the excluded middle, right? So it's more about the false dichotomy, the false dilemma, the idea that two things have to be mutually exclusive and inherently in conflict.
Yeah.
Right? And that's something that resonates with me deeply growing up Catholic. Mm-hmm. You know,
I'm a St. Louis Catholic, lapsed as well.
Yeah.
Sacred Heart Parish, Valley Park, Missouri.
Dude, I went to Sacred Heart kindergarten in Florissant, Missouri.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So, you know, I grew up being taught heaven and hell. Mm-hmm. It's somehow something that makes sense to adults still. Like, in your 80, 90 years on Earth, you do things wrong, and then for eternity, you are in fucking hell, period.
Yeah, burning.
Or you're in absolute paradise. And purgatory was a thing for a while, but I don't know if they still subscribe to that, but it's still very binary, and it's a bullshit concept, because when it comes down to it, all of the lines we draw between things, all of the, whether it's a gender or a species or a political ideology or whatever, they're mostly arbitrary, because science is messy.
Yeah.
Psychology is messy, sociology, all of it, it's very, economics, it's all very messy, and we can arbitrarily categorize things in ways that are maybe functional for us on a more elementary level. But as we evolve as a species and learn more, if we don't embrace the nuance, we get to where we are right now.
Right.
And that's the tough part, is that nuance is difficult for people to process. And if we aren't taught how to think in that way, we go into our corners, and then you add, economic disparities, you add income inequality and all this stuff, and we go further into our corners, and we start to look at the world in even stricter binaries. That leads to more conflict, and it's just a terrible recipe for the end of a species.
Yeah, and what you're saying here connects to this line that says, "We all seek meaning in our lives."
Yep.
So everybody is floundering from day to day, grasping at something that will make us feel important, even though we are incredibly small, right? So we all want to feel like these like vulnerable shells that we like inhabit these bodies. Like we want to feel like this really, really matters. So we seek these meanings, and then when you say you like are certain of like being what you believe, you deny your shadow of doubt, and then you thrive on the hatred.
Right.
Like you move from being able to see those nuances to being unable to see them because you think you're really important. So there's a lot of ego at play here as well, where we like tell ourselves how much we matter, and then like we fail to see anything in the gray, and then we kill our ability to build relationships, and then we just turn into hate machines.
Right. And what sucks is, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Our basest human characteristics are no different than any other animal on the planet. It's about survival. I subscribe pretty fully to the idea that, like the kind of selfish gene thesis, that we're ultimately just vehicles for our genes to propagate and to duplicate, and all of our behaviors are just, complex as they may be, extensions of that. So I don't think humans are fundamentally good. I don't think any species in a true survival situation is fundamentally good. It's when we come together as societies and social groups that we're given the privilege of being good to each other.
Yeah.
So as things get harder for us, we go back to those base kind of survival instincts, and it gets especially hairy in a modern technological society like this now, where we don't have to deal with survival mostly, and we are into this more nuanced kind of emotional experience type relationship with one another as societal humans. So it does bring out the worst in us in a lot of ways when we're faced with hardships, when we're faced with all the shit we're dealing with now.
I'm sensing a shift here towards like the relationships of humans, and we're talking about love and hatred, and then you've got this other song that you love, Without Love.
Dissolving into gray. It's breathing just the ticking of an unwinding clock, counting down the time it takes for you to comprehend the sheer magnitude of every single precious breath you've ever wasted. I did everything I could. I bonded with the universe to take my life instead of hers. But no amount of money, drugs, and tears could keep her here. What purpose did her suffering serve?
Yeah.
Later in the record. And I feel like this is an awesome segue into that because for me, I mean, this is, I don't know if it's my favorite Propaganda song of all time, but holy smokes, it might be.
Yeah.
It might be. And I was so lucky to interview Chris on the supporting cast tour in 2009 in Canada for that student newspaper that I said. But I asked him, I was like, I sense this personal shift in your tone.
Yeah.
And he kind of played it off like, oh, I'm not smart enough to have pulled that off consciously and blah, blah, blah. Like he like layered it with humility. But like to me, Without Love is one of the most essential songs from this band because it talks about our role in nature and, you know, the briefness of this existence and how we can spend it in certain ways or in other ways.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm just curious if you can take what you were saying from Tertium Non Datur and kind of move this into this song, which it, to me at the time was so deeply insightful and personal and just made me think about relationships in an entirely new way. Like this song, for real.
Yeah, man. It made me think about, well, it first made me think about the band in a different way.
Yeah.
Because, again, on the surface, Propagandhi can be, you know, they could be easily lumped in with the, you know, any other angsty punk band, right?
Yeah.
They're loud and obnoxious because they're counterculture in a way or whatever, right? That could be the superficial takeaway. But they're obviously much deeper than that, and there are obviously moments where they can go down these personal lanes and do it in a way that doesn't even for a second sound insincere or off-brand.
Right.
Because, again, this dude means every word that comes out of his mouth.
Yeah.
So that was my first thought, like, wow, this is different, but it's still fully Propagandhi.
Yeah.
And then I immediately connected with the point of the song, which is, well, the motivation of the song, which is loss of loved ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being a dude who lost a parent early-ish, my dad died when I was 26.
Mm-hmm.
It hit me like a ton of bricks and just brought me to tears.
Was your dad gone when this song came out?
What year?
2009?
Yeah, it was 2006.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was when it was really starting to hit me because I've always been super optimistic. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to work out kind of to a fault sometimes. And when my dad was going through cancer, it was 7 months pancreatic cancer. It was gnarly.
Yeah.
I was trying to, along with him, be kind of one of the rocks, one of the folks to just keep their shit together. Yeah, like, it's all right. It's going to work out. Everything's going to be fine. Let's not lose our shit. And that extended beyond his death. I was still trying to hold it together for the family. So it would come in waves after, whether it was months or years later, where it would just, it's almost like it's gotten worse over time. It's gotten better, but it's also gotten much worse, where there's like this subconscious void, you know, and it makes you think about existence and relationships and what matters. And it's tough for me to talk about this without like just completely losing my shit. But I think about things in this kind of, you know, zoomed out pale blue dot kind of view as well. Like we live for a blip.
Yeah.
I mean, like a fraction of a blip in the history of this planet, let alone the universe.
I
right?
know.
So everything that we care about comes down to our personal experience and our relationships with each other. Because none of it fucking matters, ultimately. It's just our experience. It's about suffering and happiness, everything in between, and connecting. Because without any kind of higher power, it's just the harsh reality of the universe. So, goddamn, this stuff just really nailed me. And without love, like he says, there's no fucking point. So, I don't know. I could go on and on.
Yeah, like the lives so brief, so disappointing, so confusing. Because we're here, like when we realize how short of a time we get here, that to me is one of the disappointments. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whenever you think about the grand scope of the universe and how many people have lived and died and we have no idea who they are, where their remains are. Like they're just like sucked back into the earth itself. And that is just such a macro level mind trip.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That it just like says like, well, I'm so insignificant. And then that comes down to, well, I'm so insignificant, so I can't really make a goddamn difference in anything that I say or do. And it's really hard to stay inspired to try to make things the better place. But then like you think about the kindred spirits line.
Yes.
And like for me, it's like every single thing that I'm doing on a given day-to-day basis is like for this like small person that I'm like now charged with raising, you know, this like 8-year-old that I've got. And I'm just like, well, now I have to stick around. I have to be here and I have to do my best. And I don't know, it's very confusing. You know, you were mentioning like how this like makes you think about your dad and like the rock thing. And like you and I, like we suburban white dudes from St. Louis, and you're like, don't be weak, don't like, cry. Like did this song like make you reflect on like your own ability to like process grief and like connect more deeply with that emotional state like in yourself?
It helped plant seeds and help get me on this journey to where I am now, because this was, you know, I was approaching 30 when this song came out, so I was having a mini early midlife crisis.
Yeah.
So it was resonating there a little bit, especially the line, you know, counting down the time it takes for you to comprehend the sheer magnitude of every single precious breath you've ever wasted.
Oh yeah.
Talking about the clock ticking, like I've thought about before changing my desktop image on my on my computer to a life calendar, counting down to like maybe 80.
Yeah.
Assuming maybe I'll live to 80, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. You know, you could maybe do the average lifespan of an American, which declines every year.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm more and more aware of my mortality as I get older, and thinking about my relationships with people and who I am, and am I a fucking annoying, arrogant, condescending, just like motherfucker to be around?
Yeah.
Or am I being cool, and am I actually like bringing love and inspiration and things into relationships and taking it and so on. So, but going back to the part about grappling with your emotions and being comfortable with being vulnerable, right? I was very against. We really rebelled against the idea of being emo, early in our career, because we blew up so mainstream that we're like, no, we're not emo, we're fucking hardcore, we're metal, and we're all this other shit.
I mean, you guys got riffs. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, we fuck with riffs.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until almost my 40s, like my mid-late 30s, that I started to really embrace it, and then especially around the time I turned 40, the pandemic gave us all the time in the world to reflect on everything. I realized that being emo, as funny as it is to phrase it like that, it's like a human superpower in a way. Like it's allowing yourself to be empathetic and allowing others' emotions to resonate with your own, and allowing yourself to emote in ways that are extremely vulnerable it allows others to do the same.
Yeah,
right?
well, and I mean, I think I've talked about this on the show before. I think in the Refusing to Be a Man episode, where I talked about this tendency of men to be punishingly withdrawn from their partners in their marriages, from their children. And it's like, dad's over there on the sofa and he's got his Budweiser and he's got his sealed lips and he's over there being strong and stoic. Yeah. And how limiting that is. You know, and how, even though I have tendencies in times in my own life where I do that whole emotionally withdrawn, punishingly to a certain degree, I can think back on many times in my life when I've been like that. But now, like, trying to be aware of it and, like, try to move towards change is really helpful and powerful for me as well.
Yeah. And I look back at my dad, his life, and the multifaceted person that he was a very conservative dude. You know, he raised me on hunting and fishing and,
me too.
you know, voting for Reagan and shit like that.
Yeah.
But he was also a thinker.
Yeah.
And he was, for the time and place that he came from, kind of, he wasn't a hippie by any means, but he was always into sci-fi and looking forward and thinking about the possibilities of things. And he was just very interested in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And he imbued curiosity into me, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And I know, or I hope at least, that at this point he would have continued to evolve. And I feel like I can say that confidently, or I know that because of the emotional moments that I had with him. He had a temper. He was a strict dude, but he also would have moments where he would just openly cry in front of me.
Mm.
So I've always tried to be both versions of him.
Yeah.
And obviously leave out the Republican guy with the temper part and the hunting and all this shit.
Yeah.
Because I'm vegan now.
Yeah.
But it's, man, it's like in some ways I'm thankful that, this is fucked up to say, like I'm almost thankful that I lost him younger because it allows me to have this kind of idealized, romanticized version of him that I can hold up and learn from.
Yeah.
And any of the turmoil that we may have gone through between then and now, like, you know, if he and my mom, let's say they got divorced or he ended up voting for Trump or some shit, like who knows what would have happened to our relationship.
Yeah.
I like to think that it would have been okay. But regardless, we didn't have to go through that. So I can look back and say, man, I can be both of those things.
Yeah.
And better.
Man, I think the relationship would have survived.
I think so too.
I've been there personally where relationships change due to politics and the propaganda line, puny human hatreds after a period of like estrangement. Mm-hmm. And I hear a song like that where it's like our puny human hatreds. I'm like, oh my God, like I need to continue to work on this because ending it and shutting it out is to me, it's just wrong. And I know that people have very specific reasons for ending relationships with people that have been toxic and harmful and abusive in their life. But for those of us who have ended relationships based purely on like an argument that we saw about a news story that came across our televisions,
right,
those relationships are so reparable. And like I've been there.
Yeah.
And so like I've had periods of estrangement due to just very dumb things and come out the other end of it. So that's why I can feel like I can like say that you and your dad, if he was still here now, would be able to do that today.
I think so too. I
Yeah.
mean, not to keep this going, but one of my best friends, who was one of my dad's best friend's son, so we grew up together. He lives in Southern Illinois. He moved away from North County, St. Louis, because too many black people moved into his neighborhood.
White flight St. Louis, man.
Yeah, or the family did. The family moved away. So I was kind of a racist teenager for a minute because I was told that my best friend moved away because of black people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I understand that. But regardless, I clearly went a different path. But my friend stayed in Southern Illinois, became a prison guard, and he's the most racist person I know, hands down. But he's like my brother.
Yeah.
I happen to want to punch my brother in the face a lot, but he's like my brother. You know what I mean? And I've thought a lot about whether or not I keep this relationship going. And what I keep coming back to is, okay, well, we love each other as human beings, as family. What good will I do for Earth, for this dude, for his family, for the community, if I just say, fuck you, I can't be your friend anymore because you believe what you believe? It's just going to further entrench him into what he believes.
He's going to be like, I lost a lifelong friend because of like something that we can't agree on today. Yeah. What if in 10 years he's totally different?
Right.
You know?
I don't think it's likely, but still, you got to try.
You never know. Like a single experience in a life can cause a trajectory shift.
Yeah.
Like as somebody can have one thing happen and they go in a totally different direction in their lives. Like it's that like that minute.
Yeah.
In a lot of times. Oh, it's crazy
Yeah.
what will cause a shift overnight.
Absolutely.
It's wild. What do you think about the music of this tune, Without Love? It's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's really the right vibe for the lyrics, like melodically and harmonically. It seems like one of those songs where, as the writer's writing it, they're just feeling where it's going to go emotionally. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes you could go the complete opposite direction and juxtapose vibes.
Yeah.
But this seemed like, I can imagine writing it and thinking like, I'm going to go someplace deep and personal with this. Mm-hmm. So I've never put a lot of thought into the music because the composition as a whole, the song, with the lyrics included, just feels right. So I experience it emotionally more than anything.
Yeah, like people are like the lyrics discussions that we've had in the last couple songs. Like, isn't it? I've said this before, but it just continuously amazes me how different everybody's experience is when you read lyrics of this kind of depth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, music connects with everybody in different ways, obviously, but like there is no shortage of stories out there of people like you, people like me, everybody else who's been on the podcast, everybody who has yet to come on the podcast, talking about like why these particular lyrics connect to them. Mm-hmm. And it just shows, it's just like this band is just this endless rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Endless. Let's end with Victory Lap. You got a Victory Lap song that you picked.
Yeah.
Tell me your overall view of Victory Lap as like a standalone piece in the band's discography.
It's the one album that I think I got into and absorbed most quickly. Mm-hmm. And I know it's because of the political climate at the time. Mm. And the song Victory Lap, to start, it connected so hard because we were, right in the middle of Trump's America and everything.
Wall.
Yeah. And that lyric about the wall what's the exact lyric? The wall they said
would make them great could not be scaled.
Yes.
Where like they build it to keep people out, but then it realizes they keep themselves in.
Yeah. It resonated so hard in the energy of that song. And, by this time, modern propaganda they're fully into this like, Iron Maiden version of themselves, So it's just ripping, and I would drive to work every day to my fucking retail job with that shit cranked, running late, ADHD style, just like, God damn it, and I'd fucking put that song on. So I'd be all charged up about politics and late to work and everything, and it was just really, really resonating. And then they start to get beyond that song into Comply Resist. They get into there's more layers that you didn't necessarily expect. Mm-hmm. Didn't necessarily expect from the band. And Chris is doing some things vocally that almost sound like character work. Mm. I don't know if maybe he just hadn't done that vibe or if he was just trying stuff out, but some of it to me sounded like he's playing characters.
So, like, you
know what I
mean
mean?
like in the beginning of Comply Resist?
Yes.
So, like, in the beginning of Comply Resist, to me, it's like almost like a movie intro.
Yes.
Where there's like an omniscient narrator telling a story over the intro music. Does that make sense? Like, imagine
Absolutely.
a movie coming in and then a voice just appears over the surround sound in a movie theater. That's, to me, like what the intro to Comply Resist is. It's that omniscient voice coming
For
at
sure.
you through the surround sound, but you don't see anybody on screen.
Yeah. And it seems like, I haven't listened to any interviews. I don't know what the specific motivation was, but it seems like there's a little bit of that kind of all over the album where it's more narrative in a way. It just seems like he was trying some new things and succeeding at all of it, as far as I'm concerned. It's a fucking phenomenal album.
Did you, so let's talk a little bit more about Comply Resist.
Yeah.
Your fourth selection.
Kingdom, this policy back we bestowed upon your savage emptiness when our cost mistakes were made. But as far as human progress goes, welcome to a slightly higher plane of innovation, opportunity for your trampled communities, the treaties that we broke, the lands that we filched, settlements put to the torch.
have, I think at one point, I don't know if you still do, but on your Twitter bio, you had the word skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
Were you ever a Hitchens guy?
Yes, and
Me too.
Yeah, that's why I was taken aback by this song. You know, as lyrics are coming in quickly and you don't understand all of them, little words pop out. And I remember listening for the first time, and as the lyric passed, I thought, did he say Hitchens?
Yeah.
Did he say Christopher Hitchens
Yeah.
in the song? And it intrigued me, of course. And then I kind of went down the rabbit hole and realized, oh, fuck, yeah, this is kind of on brand for Hitch. God damn it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because Hitchens and Sam Harris and Dawkins and Dan Dennett, you know, the four horsemen of
Right.
the new atheists were so important in my life.
Me too.
And you may have had a similar experience where you go from being raised as a Catholic, as a believer, and then you question it, and then you're angry.
Yep.
You're angry at being bullshitted your whole life.
Yes.
And being threatened with hell and all this kind of stuff. So you're fully justified in being as angry as you are, but that's not necessarily maybe the best thing for your relationships or
Right.
for your public persona per
Yeah.
se. So I fully went down that road, but it ends up being all good in the fullness of time. And I think what those dudes did at the time for raising awareness about being a non-believer and the fact that it's okay.
Yeah.
Because in the early 2000s, like if you look at polls back then, on the list of, like a political poll of the groups that are least trusted, that you would be least likely to vote for into office for the presidency, I think was the big study that they did.
Yeah.
It was Muslims, homosexuals, and atheists.
Right.
Like, no thank you, America doesn't want you.
Right.
You know? So we had to be loud.
Yeah.
You have to have the folks that are kind of like, kind of in the middle, the folks that are, I'm spiritual, but I don't, you have to have the full spectrum all the way up to, fuck you, I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
You're all fucking stupid.
Yeah.
So as unhealthy as that is, we needed that to get back to a middle ground where we can go, yeah, it's cool to believe whatever the fuck you believe as long as you're not infringing on anyone else's rights, you're not hurting anyone else. And clearly, being atheistic without theism is just fine.
Yeah.
We're not pro-Satanism, we're not pro-murder.
Right.
We just don't believe that. There's no word for someone who doesn't believe in leprechauns. There's no such thing as an a-leprechaunist.
Right.
It's just like we all know what it's like, and I'm pulling this directly from those dudes. We all know what it's like to not believe in gods.
Right.
All the other thousands of gods that came before the current mainstream ones and the mainstream ones. If you believe in one, you are an atheist in regard to everything else.
Right.
So we all know what that's like. It's okay to just subtract one more.
Exactly.
So these dudes, as flawed as they all are,
Yeah.
all four of them, rest in peace, Hitchens, they taught me a lot. And
Yeah.
I grew a lot from reading their stuff, and as I assume you did. So it's in that same spirit of questioning what you believe and what you hold sacred that I took this song and said, okay, this flawed person who taught me a lot really had some shit wrong. You know? So it's just furthering that self-reflection and growth.
Yeah, when I reread this essay from Hitchens a couple times, once yesterday and then once this morning, and I was really surprised that Chris lifted some specific lyrics in the song from the Hitchens essay. For example, he says, let me find it. So in the essay, Hitchens says, "You can guess the story. Treaties broken, lands filched, settlements put to the torch, women and children vilely abused." So there are lines in Comply Resist that Chris actually lifts from Hitchens' essay. But, he's got this, Hitchens has got this intro here that I think that if anybody who hasn't read it, you should, because it's only 8 paragraphs. There's not a lot to it. But he talks about the anti-Columbus movement. And so Hitchens starts, "My old comrade David Dellinger, hero of the anti-imperialist movement, telephoned the other day to tell me of the fast he was undertaking to protest the celebration of racism, conquest, and plunder that impended on Columbus Day." And then Hitchens replies, "I urged him to go and break his fast, old thing, 1492 was a very good year. So Hitchens is like 1492 was actually really great. And then he talks about what he finds to be what he calls faintly sinister about the anti-Columbus movement. And, you know, he talks about how if we didn't have the Columbus movement, it would be an ignorant celebration of stasis and backwardness. And so Hitchens is very, very pro-conquest in this essay, which, you know, he wrote so much, and there's so much out there that, like, if you and I are reading, you know, God is not great.
Right.
We're seeing this one tiny sliver of this very, you know, this very prolific writer who had these other views. And, you know, you and I grew up in St. Louis where we had like the hand turkey elementary school classrooms and, you know, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So that's the kind of stuff that like you and I were raised with, is to glorify these celebrations of, you know, exploration, and they left out all the conquest. And I don't know about when you started realizing like the real history of these types of things, like, but I went to Mizzou, and it was in like my freshman history classes that I started to be like, oh man, we missed a lot of material here.
They left some stuff out.
Yeah. So tell me about a little bit about your understanding of like where Chris goes with this tune and learning about what was left out of the narrative of you growing up processing the land that we're living on.
Yeah, that has been a lifelong journey, well, adult lifelong journey of discovery locally, nationally, and internationally, of course. And the big glaring lessons came from learning what we hadn't learned. Like, all the stuff you're referring to on a national level, on an imperial conquest level. And I remember mid-20s, I guess, I was like, yeah, fuck Columbus Day. It just clicked. I just all of a sudden knew it. Like, yeah, this guy, like everyone else exploring and conquering back then, was a piece of shit by today's standards.
Yeah.
Good on them for navigating the ocean and discovering things, cool. But everything else they did was horrific.
Yeah.
So I dismissed that. It was pretty easy to dismiss that, I guess, at that point in my evolution as a thinker and as a progressive person.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until more recently that started to that same mindset started to awaken things, and I guess it was when I moved back from LA, where I lived for 4 or 5 years. I moved back to St. Louis, and it was hugely eye-opening, because living in a diverse state and city like Los Angeles, California, it's like palpable how much the place is not segregated, how much race isn't an issue. That's not to say that there isn't racism, because it's fucking everywhere. But compared to St. Louis, like coming back here, we're such a segregated city to this day. We have such a horrific history, most of which we aren't taught. And the state of Missouri, we weren't taught that this was a slave state. We were taught that we were in the middle. You know, no, it's bullshit. There were slaves everywhere. We were a piece of shit state then, and we still are now. And St. Louis specifically, learning about the history of segregation and the terrible stuff that went on with the real estate market and realtors.
Redlining, blockbusting.
Encouraging white flight. Like that was all very calculated and very, very purposeful.
Yeah.
And I learned about the history of Pruitt-Igoe, the housing project.
Great documentary about that, by the way.
Yeah, there's the Pruitt-Igoe myth.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know. I would say 90+% of us as St. Louisans don't know that history, because it's been kind of pushed under the rug. While meanwhile, it's taught internationally as the worst failure in public housing. Internationally. So
yeah, it's like 5 miles away from here.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a forest in the middle of downtown where this used to be. They imploded the whole thing.
Yeah.
So this is all part of my my awakening discovery of how much had been purposely left out of my education, in all of our educations, and the mindset that motivates that that sort of redlining of everything. And it's so frustrating and so sad, but yet motivating. Makes you want to just tell everyone, and then you have to balance the like, am I the but actually guy? Fuck, you know?
Well, and what's really crazy too is like you live in St. Louis, I live in Buffalo. So I live in a very like if you're familiar with St. Louis, I live in like a very Kirkwood, Webster Groves type of area in Buffalo. And like here where you live like a mile away from my folks, so I know exactly where we are. And in a place like this, we can know these things, but then when we go house shopping, the places that we get shown, the neighborhoods that we get kind of filtered to, there's still these systems in place that like kind of place us in certain areas of town to where we're still a part of that process of white flight that started in the 40s and continues to this day. Like we still are a part of these systems that we have inherited, and unless that you very purposefully choose a different path, you just be like, oh yeah, okay, cool, that sounds good. And then you like move into this new house and you and your family live there, and you perpetuate this cycle that has been going on for the last like 70 years.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild when you think about like how like we're like these like puzzle pieces that just get like kind of filtered into different places.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And the most frustrating, lastly on that, the most frustrating and daunting part about it is that, you want to move to neighborhoods that break that that tradition or that history.
Yeah.
But then my wife and I talk about this all the time. Are we just participating in gentrification if we move to like a quote up and coming neighborhood? Because ultimately nothing's being fixed.
Right.
Like things stay the way they are because we still have school districts funded by tax dollars. We have these systems that will perpetuate this until that changes.
Yeah.
So it's not as frustrating as living in poverty, but it's goddamn frustrating, and you feel powerless to actually make change.
Yeah, and the school district funding models in the United States like are one of the major driving forces behind segregation and racism in this country. Like people buy for the school district, and they have this like notion of what is a good school and what is a bad school, what is a good school and what is a failing school. And there's so much tied up in the history of racism and white flight in these school district boundary lines that people have to do a lot of work to really process that they're not doing. You know, like you really have to think about it. And like, the end of this line here too, he kind of changes points. Like he starts off with like the history of colonization, and then he moves into this, the funny names you give your kids, the silly ways you do your hair, the jungle music that you blare, we snicker and we sneer, for they do not revere the incessant gadgetry we incessantly deploy to incessantly extract and incessantly destroy. So it's like he goes from like this like historical like 500 years ago view to like something that is like used right now to continue to divide us, to continue to create judgments and like divisions between human beings,
Right. And the thing about, I was thinking about this morning, in 1992 when Hitchens wrote this that was only, I would say like mainstream wise, considered maybe subtly racist, just like making fun of a black person's name or hair, or just like, just joking about, oh yeah, you folks with your hip hop and whatever,
Yeah.
Now that is rightfully so blatantly fucked up and super racist.
Yeah.
And it just, this like many other things, as we grow as a society and as I grow as a thinker personally and whatever, realizing the habits, the things that we say, the things that are baked into language that we just take for granted and don't realize how offensive they are, or their offensive roots, or their very hurtful roots.
Yeah.
I look back at shit. I mean, just like using a black scent for fun, for example, is fucked up.
Yeah.
Because you're ultimately like you're parodying someone else's dialect. It's not just someone else's dialect, but it's the dialect of an oppressed people.
Right.
And being a member of the oppressing race and class, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
There's no getting around the fact that that's fucked up. So this is now much more extreme example than just like using a black scent, for example. But in 1992, people talked like this all the time. People would say shit like this and say the phrase, which I assume you heard in St. Louis all the time. Someone say something like, "Oh, I don't hate black people. I just hate N-words."
Right.
And that was like an acceptable phrase for one white person to say to another.
Yeah.
And that blows my goddamn mind in retrospect.
I know. And, we're from the same place. And, like, I heard that stuff for years. And, like, I grew up, like, going to, like, Lake of the Ozarks a ton as well.
Yeah.
So you, like, take all the aspects of, like, the toxicness of Missouri and you put all the rich, white, suburban people at one lake and you feed them alcohol all weekend.
Yep.
And then, like, the conversations on those boats at like Party Cove, or when you like go like drop your anchor somewhere and like party all day long.
Yeah.
It really just comes out because, pre-smartphones, people were just like letting it rip nonstop and being like none of it was recorded. So like they felt free to just say things. And so that's like the kind of stuff that I was just surrounded by nonstop. Looking back, I'm just like, how did I not turn out like this?
Yeah.
How did I get kind of fortunate and lucky to, go a different way? And it's like music, and traveling and leaving here and going somewhere else for a while to see like different ways that places can process things. Cause like I lived in Mexico and in a city of like 1 million people, and that was extremely eye-opening. And then I lived in England, and then I lived in Canada, and like, so like moving around is one of the most essential things I ever did.
It's essential for growth as a human being, period. You can't stay in the same place forever, or you will be that person.
Well, Propagandy sends their listeners on an intellectual travel and an intellectual journey.
Yes.
If we let them, if we move beyond just the totally awesome ragers that they give to us musically, and we dig a little deeper. So, to bring this in for a landing, tell me a little bit about why this band kind of matters to you here and now, like today. What do they continue to do for you and push you to do as a person who cares about the world, thinks, plays music, creates art? Tell me a little bit about where this band kind of fits for you in that.
They're one of 2 or 3 artists who have been around my entire adult life, who continue to make music, continue to make new art, and continue to have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world in a way that isn't cynical. It doesn't seem tired, worn out. They persist in a way that I think really probably appeals to my OCD and ADHD, which is an engine with an endless fuel tank.
Yeah.
So it's inspiring in that sense.
Yeah.
And the music just gets better and better. Like my 2 favorite bands right now, that are currently active, Propagandy and He Is Legend. They just keep getting better, and I don't understand how that's possible. So I'm fascinated, I'm inspired, I'm motivated, and I'm filled with like the joy of new art coming out because as you know, you get older and you get stubborn. It's hard to be into new stuff. And if you're a musician who's played thousands of shows, sometimes you just get sick of music.
Yeah.
So when those rare moments are as special as they are when a new Propagandy album comes out, for example, it means a lot.
Yeah. Well, Chris recently said that he is right now fully focused and committed on making the best Propagandy record of all time. So I feel like the vibes within the band are probably pretty good if Chris himself is saying that. So I'm excited. But Adam Russell, where can people find you who are listening to this? Where can they find you if they want to follow along with what you do?
My personal social media stuff is at Adam the Skull on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay.
I don't post a ton On Instagram, I'm shitty at social media, but my stories are usually full with, reposts or things. It's a good balance between political stuff.
Yeah.
And just straight Beavis and Butthead bullshit.
Yeah.
And my band, and then my Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
And then my podcast, Thank the Maker, a Star Wars podcast, is at Thank the Maker on Instagram and TikTok, at Thank the Maker Pod on Instagram and TikTok, at Thank the Maker on Twitter. Story of the Year is at Story of the Year on all the stuff. And that's it.
Awesome. Well, Adam, I have been delighted to be at your home, to hang out, chat about St. Louis, chat about all these great songs, this incredible band, and hearing your stories and how you connect to this band, and to share this moment, because like we grew up in this strange and interesting city that we're currently in. So to be able to reminisce and like kind of talk about some of our connections over the years has been a real thrill. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
The jungle music that you blare. We snicker and we sneer, for they do not revere. This says to catch a tree, when it says to lead a play.